Guardians.
Very good. Let's see where we're up to here.
What not? I mean, everyone knows.
So let me start the shir by thanking you for the Shalach Manas. Even my wife was inspired by it. Baruch Hashem. So I think what we got up to, again, it's been 2 weeks, so it's a matter of reminding ourselves about Rabbi Chanina. But Lema Misayele. So let's see if we could all find a place here on Daf Ayin Aleph Amid Beis. And if you count up from the bottom in this case, approximately 9 lines, you'll see Lema Misayele. The first word in the line is Chenek. Everybody have that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. So the Gemara is going to try to bring a raya to this yesod of Rabbi Chanina of Hol V'Ishtene, meaning that if we cannot impose upon him the chiyuv onesh as he implemented the crime because he's changed. He's now in a different situation and his misa would not be the same. So we'll just go over quickly the case. It's a ben Noach shabirach es Hashem v'nis gayer. So as a ben Noach, he's chayiv sayiv. As a Yisrael, he's chayiv skila. And according to Rabbi Chanina, since ishtani misaso, therefore he's potter. The exception to that rule we spoke about last time, and that's when it's meshech shaychi. You know, when you have a misa chamura and you want to give him the misa kala, and we say it's like the same misa. Okay, well, leave that on the side for right now. So what's going to be with this brisa? This brisa is going to be quoted now as a proof to the principle of Rabbi Chanina that hoel v'ishtene ishtene. And by way of background, we're talking about a nara hamurasa shinzinsa, and her punishment is skila. Now, naras last for 6 months, and after that she becomes a bogeres. And now, for the same act of znus, her din goes down a madrega to chenek. So again, originally as a nara, if we were to condemn her for the punishment as it was generated in its time by the Ma'aseh Avera, the punishment would be skila. But now we're judging her in Bezdin, and her punishment is chenek, because now she's what? She's a bogeres. So that's called sarcha v'achkach bogra, meaning she had the Ma'aseh Nus when she was a nara murasa, and now when we bring her to Bezdin, she's already in the state of bagus, v'achkach bogra. And the Bryce establishes Tidon Bechenek. And her Misa will be that of Chenek. Now, Chenek, if you recall, was the Misa that she would get if she was condemned now as a Bogeres for this Maisa's Nus. And now the Gemara asks the following question on the Bryce. Biskilo, my time alone. Why don't we go back to the Maisa Avera and Bismana? That Avera would have generated what? Misa, the Misa of Skila. Because an Aramurasa gets a more Chamerdika Misa than a Bogeres. And the only way we could justify that the Brisa will exonerate her from the Chi of Skila, as was generated at the time of the Maisa Avera, is Lab Mishum, Dahol Ishtene. That since her Misa changes, we can no longer impose upon her the original Misa. So if we take this principle and plug it into Rabbi Chanina's original case, the Ben Noach, Shabir Chas Hashem, would be Chayiv what? Sayiv. Everyone with me? Mm-hmm. That's a pretty easy thing to remember because Ben Noach always gets Sayiv. And now he was Misgayer, and if he had perpetuated the crime now, after Geras, he'd be Chayiv a Misa Chamura, which is called Skila. And why not go back to the Maisa Avera and superimpose on this Ben Noach Shabir Hashem V'Nis Gayer the original Misa as it was at the time of the perpetration of the crime, namely Saif. No. Says Rav Chanina, we can't go back to the original moment of the crime because now the din has changed, and if that Avera would be perpetuated today after Geras, it would not generate the Chiyuv Sai, but rather Skila. And therefore, Ishtani Ishtane, and therefore the Ben Noach is part. And the Gemara slugs this up. Why? The Gemara says, Ha'amar le Rabbi Yochanan Litana. Rabbi Yochanan changes the girsa in the brisa. We have the girsa of what Tidon Bechenek, and he has a different girsa. He substitutes Tni Tidon Beskila. Tidon Beskila means that we're going to give her the punishment which she would have been chayebes, the punishment that we would have implemented at the time of what? At the time of the Avera. She perpetrated the crime when she was an Arab Rasa. She generates a Chiyuv Skila. And therefore, says Rabbi Yochanan, will give us Skila. In other words, we're going to go back to the original moment of the crime. And if you take a look at Rashi, I want to show you two different Rashis here, just to compare and contrast. There's one Rashi, which is 8 lines up from the bottom of the page, Lema Misayele, Li Rabbi Chanina, Di Omar Bidina Dahashta. So let's underline those two words, Bidina Dahashta. Rashi is pointing out that we cannot implement, according to Rabbi Chanina, the punishment that was appropriate at the time that she did the Avera, but rather it's only Dina Dahashta. So the Dina Dahashta undermines the Dina Demeikara. However, when Rashi gets to Rabbi Yochanan, Tido Beskila, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines up before the end of the Amud, he says Demeikara. And if we compare and contrast the two Rashis, when Rashi's talking about Rabbi Chanina, he emphasizes the Hashta, which means that we mafkia the original Onesh. Whereas when Rashi gets to Rabbi Yochanan, who says Tidon Beskila, he says Dimei Ikara. So that's the difference, that Rabbi Yochanan is willing to go back to the original Ma'aseh Avera and generate the punishment, whereas Rabbi Chanina is arguing, wait a minute, there's a new scenario right now. And right now, under the present circumstances, the Ben Noach would not be Chayev Sayev, so we can't give him Sayev. And if you take a look at the Masechet, he just simply summarizes this. And at the very end of this presentation, right before Mishnah, I think you all have the Masechet, right? Mm-hmm. It says 2.5 lines up from the bottom. The Af Ben Noach, he's now interpreting Rabbi Yochanan, and according to Rashi, Rabbi Yochanan holds Mei Ikar. We go back to the original Misa as it was generated at the time of the crime, and that would be in Ben Noach Shabir Hashem. Af, despite the fact Shishtana Dino, even though he is now a Ger, he's Yisrael, which would generate Skila, nevertheless, according to Rabbi Yochanan, Lo Ishtan So Misaso, which means that we're going to impose what Misa on him? The Misa that was appropriate at the time of the crime, which would be what? Saif, when he was a Ben Noach. So clearly, without a shadow of a doubt, the sum of this sugya is that we have a machlokes, a fundamental machlokes between Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Yochanan as to whether or not we can apply the principle of nidon demei kara, which means that we can mete out the punishment as it would have been meted out had we judged him at the time of the crime. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan is willing to say yes, let's go back to mei kara. Rabbi Chanina would say, no, whole ish today. We have a different situation today. We cannot turn the clock back and judge him based on the crime as it was committed originally, because whole the ish today ish.
What does it do with the Mishnah?
What do you say?
What did Rabbi Yochanan do with our Mishnah?
With our Mishnah of what? Of Ben Sora Mora?
Yes.
You mean, why not say that we should condemn him when, let's say, he was Barach before the Gemar Din?
Yes.
Right. So if he was Barach before the Gemar Din, and therefore what he did already, the Maisa HaMachayev of what? Zolel V'Soveh, then according to Rabbi Yochanan, if we go back to Meikara, then who cares if right now, today, it's already Hikif HaZakan, at the time that he perpetrated the crime, he would be Chayev what? He would be Chayev Misa Skila, right? Misa Skila. So why can't we impose that Misa Skila That's what they. That's
Because
what.
that's how it comes to Bulgarians.
Yeah.
But maybe it's different because now he'd be part of the Gamma.
The
Different.
Bulgarians wouldn't be.
Right.
There's two types of
Correct. Correct.
So Misa.
That there is a gvul, there is a boundary, even according to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is saying that if there's a Maisa Vera, which would generate a Chiyuv Misa today, under present circumstances, then we can implement the Misa of yesterday, if you follow what I mean, of the moment of the Maisa Vera. But if today he's completely out of the entire parsha, you can't judge him as a Ben Sorah Morer when he's out of the league. He's not a candidate for being a Ben Sorah Morer. Okay. Now, if you remember, again, it was 2 weeks ago, at the end of the year, I asked you to look in 2 different Rambams. And if you didn't get a chance to do so, we'll do it together now. There's a Rambam in Hilchas Malachim, Perek Yud, Halacha Dalet. And we're going to try to figure out whether the Rambam is going to paskin la halacha like Rabbi Chanina or not. So just listen to the following words. I'm not going to read the entire Rambam because we don't have to go through the entire Rambam. Ben Noach sheberech es Hashem v'nis gayer. What's going to be the next word? Ben Noach sheberech es Hashem v'nis gayer.
If he holds like Rabbi Chanina, he'll be part of it.
Pot. So who does Rambam paskin like? Rabbi Chanina. Now watch this. Hilchas Isurei Bia, Perek Gimel, Halacha Yud. Bo Edim Achar Shebagra. Okay, so the Rambam is talking about a Nara Murasa Shezinsa, and therefore her chiyuv would be what? Would be skila. But Boa Edim Achar Shebagra. So we didn't get a chance to condemn her for Misa Skila until after she was Bagra. And he says the following: Harezu niskeles bebeis haskila. Who is the Rambam paskening like that? Like Rabbi Yochanan.
The Gemara clearly said that they're dependent upon each other. I mean,
Apparently, the Rambam holds. Again, I don't know exactly how to read it into the Gemara. I'll give it a shot. But the Gemara is going to say now that ha'amar le Rabbi Yochanan l'tana tana tni tidon beskila, meaning Rabbi Yochanan is not undermining the shita of Rabbi Chanina. He also accepts Rabbi Chanina, but he's going to change the brisa, and the brisa is going to say skila. So that according to the Rambam, it's not that the Gemara was quoting Rabbi Yochanan and the change in the brisa to indicate that Rabbi Yochanan rejects Rabbi Chanina. That's not so. It can't be so because the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Chanina, and at the same time he accepts Rabbi Yochanan. So that what the Gemara is doing is, in a sense, it's redefining Rabbi Chanina in such a way that although in the case of a Ben Noach Shebirech es Hashem, the Achar Kach Nisgayer, he's Potter, which is Rabbi Chanina, but nevertheless, for some odd reason, in the case of a Nara Murasa Shezinsa, whereas Misasa should be Beskila, but now she's Bagra, is the Rambam is going to nevertheless say that even according to Rabbi Chanina, we can go back and we can impose the Chi of Skila, the Onish Skila on her. And we have to figure out why. But does everybody have the, just the structure here? That's what, the facts on the ground, so to speak. Okay. So in order to get the ball rolling here, I'm going to ask a child's question. Is that okay? What we used to call in the yeshivas a klutz kasha. Okay? And you'll laugh at me, but I'm still going to ask the question. We've been assuming in this sugi Rabbi Chanina that when we bring a person in front of Beis Din in order to condemn them for a crime, we cannot condemn them with the punishment of yesterday, meaning at the time of the Ma'aseh Avera, what we call Meikara, because that's gone. If the person that we're condemning today would implement the same Maisa Avera, the same action, they would not be chayav that same Misa that they would be chayav had they been condemned at the time of the Maisa Avera. So far, so good?
Yeah.
That's the way we've been understanding it. So I want to ask you a question. What happens if a person's Machal Shabbos and we bring him to Beis Din on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, etc., any day of the week, Yom Chol? Well, had he perpetrated the same action today on Yom Chol, he would not be Chayav Misa. Now you're all laughing at me, but I call it a Klatzkasha, but Torah he Belumon on Yitzhara. And I think that maybe we've gone too far in understanding Rabbi Chanina. And that there's got to be a fundamental difference between Rabbi Chanina's case of a Ben Noach, Shabirach Hashem V'Nizgayer, and the case of a person who violated Shabbos on Shabbos, and we didn't get a chance because we don't, Beis Din is closed for business on Shabbos. Right? This week's parsha, right? Until when? Until Chol. So we're going to say, wait a minute. If he would have done the same Maisa today on Yom Chol, he would not be chayiv. Therefore, we can't be machayiv him for being Machal Shabbos on Shabbos, which is obviously the most ridiculous statement in the world. But what then is the difference? What is Rabbi Chanina arguing here?
When you do the din, it has nothing to do with the person. When we say Kem Dishtane Ishtane, it's the person who was Mishtaneh.
Okay, I'm just going to ask you for my own selfish benefit. Could you use a Talmudic term instead of person? The gav. Do you mind?
No,
Okay. Now, sometimes you use brisket terminology and people get very upset about it. But here I think it fits like a glove.
Okay.
The Ishtanei of Yochanan is based on the following. There's a new Gavra here. There's a change in the status, the identity of the Gavra. We cannot judge a Ben Noach when he's a Yisrael. Who's standing in front of us in Beis Din? Is it a Ben Noach that we could judge with the laws of a Ben Noach? Or is it a Yisrael after Gerus? And what's the answer? Panam Chadashis. It's a new Gavra. The Gavra is a Gavra Yisrael. What are you going to do? You're going to impose upon the Gavra Yisrael a Chiyuv Bisa Sayef because he was Mevarachas Hashem as Ben Noach. Who are you judging here? Do you have a Ben Noach in front of you to judge? Do you have the ability to be Gomer as Dino Sayef when today he's Yisrael, and had he perpetrated this crime of Birchas Hashem as Yisrael, he be chayav skila, be chayav a misa chamura? However, that has nothing to do with a person who violated the Shabbos yesterday, or let's say 3 days ago, right? And today, it's a day of Chol. He hasn't changed his status. He hasn't changed his identity. Reb Chanina is not opposed, in principle, to condemning a person today for an Avera that he perpetrated yesterday. The problem, says Rabbi Chanina, is to judge a person for a crime today when that gavra, that status of a person, of an identity, is no longer existing. If that be the case, then I think we could understand the Rambam. Anybody want to take a shot at it? Sorry, I talk to you like I talk to my 18-year-olds, but you don't mind. The Rambam again, on the one hand, the Rambam paskins that a Ben Noach shebirach es Hashem v'achar kach nizgayer pot like Reb Chanina. Then we open up the Rambam and Hilchos Isurei Bia, and lo and behold, she perpetrated the crime and this nus as what? As a nara, and therefore she generates a chiyuv skila. But when we get to Beis Din, what do we have to do? Well, we'll say the following, according to Reb Chanina. Well, if she would have perpetrated the crime today in Spokeres, she'd only be chayav what? Only be chayav chenek. So how can we impose a chiyuv skila? We're going to apply Rabbi Chanina's principle, and the Rambam says, no, she will be judged for skila. What's the answer I will say? There's no shinui gam. There's no Shina Gavra between a Nara and a Bogeres. There's a Shina Misa, but not a Shina Gavra. Which means that according to Reb Chanina, we don't have to ask the question, well, what if she perpetrated that crime as this today as a Bogeres? That's not the issue in Reb Chanina's frame of reference. What he's bothered by is how can we judge a Yisrael for a crime that he committed as a Ben Noach? We can't do that. The punishment for a Ben Noach is not appropriate for a judgment of Ben Yisrael. But that's not true in the case of a Bogeres. I can certainly punish her and condemn her for that chiyuv of the avera as she perpetrated when she was a nara, and therefore keep b'chayva skila. So you'll ask me, wait a minute, if there's no shini gavra, so what is going on over here? I mean, it's really a strange kind of halach, is it not? The Torah says on the one hand that as a nara she's chayeves what? Skila. And then you tell me, well, as a bogeres, she's only chayeves chenek. I mean, what's that all about? And the answer to that has to do with the laws of Ishus. There's an Ishus called Narus, and there's an Ishus called Bagus. And there are many, many differences between the two. For example, a Nara is Birshus Avia, Linidorel, Lamaisi Adera. And even as far as Hafaras Nidarim are concerned, she's still a Nara, and maybe we'll get together her Oros together with the Av, and then we'll combine them together and get Afara and so forth and so on. But about Geras is a whole new parsha. That's a full-fledged Ishus. And therefore the Misa is going to reflect a different kind of violation of Ishus. The violation of Ishus of Narus is not the violation of the Ishus of Bagrus. But that doesn't mean that we can't condemn her with the punishment that she would have been chayeves at the time that she perpetrated the crime. We have every right to do so as long as there's no Shina Gavra. And that's the Shittas Rambam. The Rambam feels that there's no need to reconcile these two halachas. On the one hand, we can accept Rabbi Chanina in the case of Ben Noach, and we're going to say Hol V'Ishtene, because as Yechiel said very well, that person is no longer around. We can't judge and condemn a new person for the judgment and the punishment that would be appropriate to the old person, because the old person ain't enemy. But in the case of Nara and Bogeres, the Rambam says. So again, how do we read this into the Gemara? It's a little bit difficult in the language of the Gemara, but the Gemara is telling us not that Rabbi Yochanan is rejecting Rabbi Chanina. And again, it could be in Klali Apsak. I don't know. I'm not a bucky in this, but it could be that we pass like Rabbi Yochanan against Rabbi Chanina. No. Rabbi Chanina never rejected Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Chanina are on the same boat. Just that the Havamin of the Gemara was Lema Misayele, that maybe this new din of Tidon Bechenek, right? What was the original Girsa in the price? It was Tidon Bechenek. And which is the Misa of Chenek? Remind me of Rabosai. It's the Misa for a Bogeres, correct? For a Bogeres. And you know what? What happened to the Misa of Skila? The Gemara didn't understand that in the Havamina. What happened to the Misa of Skila? Where did it disappear? Where did it dissipate? Ella, what you're going to tell me that will apply Reb Chanina's principle even in this case of Hol V'Ishtene? The Gemara says, no. There's no Hol V'Ishtene. Even according to Reb Chanina. There's no Shini Gav. And therefore, she'll be punished not with, as you mistakenly had the Girsa, with Chenek, but rather she'll be punished with the original Onesh as she perpetrated it as a Nara, namely Ski. Adkan.
Why is that not a shinui, like a shinui in the Gavra? Nara and Bulgaria.
Because again, she matures and she grows older, and that she's now more, let's say, independent of her father. But to say that, therefore, we're going to go as far as to say we can't condemn her for a crime that she committed as a Nara, that far we're not going to go.
Can we say the difference between Tana and Bulgaria? That the Shinui government.
Well,
you're not chayiv anyway.
that becomes very theoretical question. You could be absolutely right, but right now that's theoretical because a katana, is
I think the question is the relationship to the law, and I'll explain what you mean. using your kasha, right? Any Jew, in theory, if they were in our Moreset, receives that punishment. The same way any Jew, in theory, who is Mechal Shabbos receives a certain punishment. Meaning the relation between the once you're Jew, I can take it doesn't matter what they are now.
Right, correct. A Jew's a Jew, whether she's a Naro, whether she's a Bogeres, whether it's Shabbos, whether it's a weekday, no radical change that would prevent us and inhibit us from imposing a judgment as it was perpetrated originally at the time of the crime.
But in the case of Ben Saramar, you have
Yeah.
to say that he's totally mufka once he's already
That's what I was going to say. I think the question needs to be asked is how this must
Right, and that's what we discussed before, that in the case of Hikif Hazakon, that's already a Shinigam. As far as dinim of
Okay,
Ben
so-
Saramora, you can't condemn him as a Hikif Hazakon when he's out of the whole
But
country.
it seems to be similar to a Nara who becomes in
Well, in a certain
It's a
sense,
different
it's
phase of
similar,
maturation.
but not vis-a-vis the halacha of Chiv Bisa. Do you follow what I'm saying? Meaning, you could talk about which Chiv Bisa is appropriate for which violation of issues, for which desecration of issues. But you can't talk about which Chiv Bisa is appropriate for Zolel Vesove, who's now Hikif Sazakan, because there's no Chiv Bisa at all.
Okay, but still, wouldn't you call this that there is no Shinui Gavra, but there is yes a Shinui Dina? The Shinui Dina is more radical. It's from being Chayv Misa to becoming Patur.
No.
But as far as the Gavra, it's a stage of maturation, just like that Nara becomes at a different age of Bulgaria.
But again, but you feel, let's look at it in a relative term, meaning relative to the Chiyuv of Ben Soromor, you're not a Gavra as far as Ben Soromor is concerned. You're just completely mufka from the parasha. It's not just a change in details and nuances, which onus we're going to impose upon you, but we're going to just remove you completely from the parasha. You're not a Gavra of Ben Soromor. What? There's no Chiyuv.
So any case a few weeks ago, someone becomes a shaita, would that be Shinui in Gavra?
I would say so,
But
yes.
that's hypothetical. Well,
Yeah, that for sure is a Shinigam.
it would be.
Yeah.
And-
Like a cut in the showtime.
But the problem with this, with the way of learning, is the Rav Chanina is talking about a sui generis case. There's no other thing to compare it to. You say, normally when you give a cloud or something, you're giving a case of a ger, and you're saying that this is a unique thing.
Right. And we're extending it to Ben Soromor. Right.
The whole Ishtana is, it seems like it would be a whole case of things, but you're saying no, it's only a ger.
Okay, we'll see if we can maybe come up with all cases, if that'll satisfy your curiosity. But I have a problem now with Rashi. Because Rashi insists that there's a machlokes between Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Yochanan. Which means that according to Rashi, Rabbi Chanina really went very, very far. He could not accept Tidon, again I always... Beskila, right? He could not. Rabbi Chanina could not accept Tidon Beskila, and basically, according to Rashi's interpretation, we can't judge a Nara Beskila when she's now a Bogeres, because had she perpetrated the crime as a Bogeres, she would not be Chayev Beskila.
So that's when we quarrel.
Do you follow what I'm saying? Rashi, everything we said is wonderful according to the Rambam, because the Rambam is accepting Tidon, what is it again? Tidon Beskila. But Rashi's insisting that according to Reb Chanina, it would be impossible to say Tidon Beskila, because how can we judge this woman for Skila when today she's no longer a Nara?
Why is that a problem? Why can't we say that according to Rashi there is a machloket?
He owes that as a Shinui.
Okay, let's go with it straight. Let's say according to Rashi, in the context of Rabbi Chanina, it's too late to impose the original punishment, because now if the crime would have been perpetrated, that original punishment would not be imposed.
Right.
But let's jump, according to Rashi, to Rabbi Yochanan for a moment. Rabbi Yochanan against Rabbi Chanina, because again, according to Rashi's machlokas between the two of them, is going to insist that we can impose the original punishment. And therefore, according to Rashi, in the case of a Ben Noach, Shabirach es Hashem v'nisgayer, what will be Rabbi Yochanan's position? And this is no question about it, according to Rashi. He'll be chayiv sayit. So far, so good? Okay, now here's where I get really complicated. You're going to put this man to death with sayif, even though he's a ger. Okay, then? Now let me ask you a simple question. Do you have two Eidim? Do you have a Bezdin of Chaf Gimel? Do you have Asra? Do you have all the requirements that it takes to condemn a person to death who's a Jew standing in front of a Jewish court? Does anybody hear my question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm pushing, screaming out loud here. I just don't understand. According to Rabbi Yochanan, what do we do here? We're going to condemn a Jew to death with one dayan, with one aid, without asra, based on the fact that yesterday he was a guard? I don't know. I can't accept.
One second.
I just,
Wait, unless you stand it according to Rabbi Yochanan, you're going to tell me this is too preposterous.
right.
Crimes committed as a non-Jew are also, I don't want to say prosecuted, but dealt with with the process that a non-Jew deserves. The fact that you convert afterwards does not remove you does not give you the added protection. No Eidim, no Atra. It doesn't. Whereas a Jew receives more due process.
Right.
Why does a non-Jew get that this punishment in the first place without due process?
Okay, Yaakov, look, I can't disagree with you.
Oh no.
I'll tell you why. Because if I disagree with you, you'll disagree with me, and then
Right.
we'll keep going on at loggerheads, till the end of time. But my humble opinion is that in order to condemn a Jew in a Jewish court, you must have Chaf Gimel Dayanim. You must have two witnesses. And although had we been able to judge him as a Ben Noach, we would not require all these dinim, but these are dinim in the Gemar Din. We want to establish a Gemar Din. Who's standing in front of us? A Jew. You're going to be Gomer as Dino Shel Yisrael with one dayan, with one aid, thus can it zayin. Again, and Yaakov, you might be right and I might be wrong, but I'm just explaining my opinion.
But
Maybe in a country, that's what we're
right, okay.
Oh.
So maybe you could say that he.
That's
Barmai for me.
Bored with me. Again, let's not reject Yaakov. Yaakov may be right, but we're going to say the following: that in the, let's see what words I can use here. In the process of the Gemar Din, we're going to say now Tzvei Dinim. There are two different halachos. There's one din called the process of Gemar Din. There are certain conditions in Gemar Din. You can't be Gomer as Dino without X, Y, and Z. That's number one. Now you want to know which Onesh we're going to put? Once there's a Gemar Din, now we're going to punish him for the crime as it was appropriate for that crime in its time. And therefore, we're going to give this Jew a Chiv Sayif. Why? Because that's the Maisa Vera. Right? We can be Gomer as Dino with all the requirements of Gemar Din, and we can paskin on this Jew that he's Chayav Misa, because we went through all the due process necessary to issue such a jurisdiction. But as far as the punishment is concerned, the punishment is not part of the Gemar Din. The punishment is beyond the Gemar Din. The punishment, or even maybe I'd say better, is even before the Gemar Din. What do I mean? The punishment is matim, is appropriate for what? For the Maisa Vera. Tzvei Dinim. We got two dinim here on both sides. We got one din in the Maisa Vera and another din in the Gemar Din. And we're going to combine the two, and there's no contradiction. As far as the Maisa Vera is concerned, we will decide with the Gemar Din And then we will impose and condemn him with that punishment, that onish misa, which is appropriate for the Maisa Vera. But how do you establish that Maisa Vera? How do you Gomer's Dino? Well, we have many dinim, many requirements in Gemara Din. You can't be Gomer's Dino without a certain Bezdin, without certain Eidim, without Asra. These are all requirements of Gemara Din.
So you're saying though, Tachlis, they won't put him to death. But you didn't have based in, you didn't have a
Why not? Why not? Now we'll get him in front of a court of 23. Now we'll get to Eidim. Again, we don't know that there's only one Eid.
But didn't the Hatra have to happen before? And Hatra'ah, you have to do while he's doing it or before he did it.
So there was Asra.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that at the time that he implemented the punishment, that he implemented the crime, there was Asra.
I think, okay.
There were two Eidim.
But if they weren't,
Then forget it.
I'm saying,
If
I
there
agree,
weren't, then we cannot condemn him in a Jewish court.
I agree,
as
we
a
have
Jew.
two separate issues we have to deal with. You always have to deal with what the din will be, and that we go according to Rabbi Yochanan, not like Rabbi Chanina, that we take the original one. But you also have a separate thing, a chitzoni thing, that you have to have the process of the Eidim and the base and all those things.
In order to achieve what?
In order to be able to do the death.
Again, the language
Process,
is very
okay.
important. In order to achieve a Gemara Din.
Okay, let's say
There's
that.
certain conditions in a Gemara Din. You can't be Gomer as Dino without a certain base.
And if they're missing, Ibemet would not put him to death. Okay.
And if you agree with me, then call a couple. I'm very happy. Except for Tosfos. And I was really
But Rashi's not chayiv to
so
talk about.
happy.
Rashi's not chayiv to talk about. Rashi can-
Correct. But I'm going to ask you how to understand this Tosfos. Okay? So let's open up to Tosfos. It's on Daf Pei Omid Beis. And let me show you the Tosfos. Now, the Tosfos, just for your own knowledge, is the next to the last Tosfos on Pei Omid Beis. So you can breathe a sigh of relief because
Not the long one.
because otherwise, if we go back to Uber Yerech, Imo will be here for at least a month, and it'll be Chametz Shavuot of Pesach. But I'm interested in Tosas Dibra Maskel Havi Musra L'Dover Kal. Now, if you'd like,
It's there.
oh, okay. When I see these guys with the Masechet tray, I get nervous. Reminds me of my basic training. They gave me an Uzi and an Masechet tray. Anyway, so if you'd like, again, this is just a matter of taste. You can open up to what's called Bi'urei HaTosfos, since you all have the same Masifta. Again, I don't need the Bi'urei HaTosfos, but it makes it a lot easier when you're not learning that sugya. We're not holding on Daf Pei Omid Beis. Okay, then?
Yeah.
So if you want to know the page number, it's page Mem Zion in Bi'urei HaTosfos, if that helps anybody.
Yeah.
And it's on the bottom right. Now, let's give a background, an introduction. The Mishnah tells us that if a number of people were condemned to death, and somehow, again, don't ask me exactly how this happened, but they got mixed up together, and we don't know which Misa we can meet out. So the Mishnah says we give them the most lenient Misa. Are you with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the Gemara wants to be medayik on an issue that we can come to a conclusion on that issue from our Mishnah here in the 9th parak in Hanisraf. And that issue is, what happens if you give an imprecise hasra to a criminal, but you upped it, meaning you gave him a hasra, don't do this because you'll get a worse misa than in truth. And there's one opinion that says that's not a hasra. Hasra has to be perfect. You know, yekish, it's got to be exact. The other opinion is that musra l'davar chamur havi musra l'davar akal. Frektosus, the imtomar. Okay. Now, again, if you're with me here in the Bi'urei HaTosfos, if that makes life a little easier, he says the following. So this is that last major paragraph on the right. where it says Makshim Atosvis. Yeah? V'tifshot, I'm going to prove to you that Musra L'Davar Chamur Havi Musra L'Davar Akal. Mehad Esanya B'Perik Ben Sorer Ben Noach Shehikas Chavero O Sheba Al Eshes Chavero. Okay. All right, this is not the part that we need. Okay, let's just go again. If you have a chance, you'll read it through, but we need this part. Asa came be Israel. So Ben Noach killed a Jew, or he had a relationship with an Ashes Ish of Israel. Vinis Gayer, Chayev, Kloma. Imba Ben Noach al Ashes Ish Yisrael. V'achach nis Gayer, Chayev. Okay. Mishum di Ovad Hashta Bar Katolahu. Where's my my little scorecard here? When I need it, I can't find it. All right. So let's just go through this. So a Ben Noach is always going to be chayv what? Sayef. So a Ben Noach shebal Ashes Ish Yisrael, right? And he did it before his gerus. He's chayv Sayef. If he does it after his gerus, he had the same relationship with an Ashes Ish after gerus. Then he's chayav chenek, which is kal and which is chomer. Chenek is what? Kal, correct. Sayef is chomer. And here's where the Gemara is going to apply that principle of kala b'chamura meshach shaycha, if you remember that principle, correct? All right. So what's the deal now? What are we going to do with this Ben Noach's Gaia? Says Tosfos, he's going to be chayav. What does that mean? He's going to be chayav. He's going to be chayav. Just 1 second. Right? He'll be chayav sayif, but not really sayif, because we can't give him sayif, but we'll give him chenek, which is sayif, if you follow me, because included, Meshach Shaycha included under Saif is also Chenek. You remember that whole discussion that we had? Frektosis, wait a minute. What Asra did they give this guy? Right, what would have been his punishment had he been condemned as a god? Saif. So they gave him Asra for Saif. Correct? And he says, Klomar, the Gamim Hayabal Ashes Ish Yisrael Achshav Achad is Gayer Nami Havi Chayev Misa V'lachen Yesh L'Chayev Mashibol Lekon Shenis Gayer Val Korchach V'da Asrubei. So they gave him Asra. Dilo Asrubei. If they didn't give him Asra, Yavid Hashtalah Bar Ketolo, he wouldn't be Chayev Misa. Okay, so what kind of Asra did they give him? Right, he says, what?
Like for Saif, they didn't know he was going to convert him.
Correct. They didn't give him a hasra shema asid. They gave him a hasra for Saif. Correct. Alma musra l'Saif, havi musra l'chenek. In Kain Yeshlo Kliach me abrais on the top left column. Kiman diom musra l'davar chomer havi musra l'davar kal. Do you remember we had a machlokes where the hasra has to be precise. Hello, anybody home? Does the hasra have to be precise, or could you give masra on a chomer bisa, and that would cover even yesh b'chal masana would cover even a lesser bisa. So Tosa says, wait a minute, I have an explicit Gemara over here. The Gemara says that the Ben Noach, who's now Misgayer, is going to be chayev sayef, and just 1 second, the Ben Noach that was Misgayer is chayev chenek, even though the hasra that they gave him was what? Was sayef. Says Tosfos yesh lomar. He adds the word miyashvim. Do we have that word miyashvim? Anyway.
No, he's all
right. Okay, fine. No, he shouldn't have darkened it. Anyway, v'yesh lomar dilakach lo eviu chacham misham de musud avacham musud avkal the yesh lidchos the mayri can go shlo isrubo.
Oh no.
We're in deep trouble, Rabbosai. The lo hisrubo. The afilu lo asu biyoso nachri. Yesh lanu l'chayvo bisa. Afal pishin is gayer. Is Tosfos saying we're going to condemn him as a ben Noach, and basically we're going to give him saif, but we can't give him saif, so we'll give him chenek, even though he didn't have asra. And why? Because as a Nachri, he doesn't need Asra. And he was Chayiv Misa as a Nachri without Asra. Now we're judging him for death and condemning him as a Ger, and we'll condemn him without Asra. Gamal, this is against everything we've been saying.
So what you thought was untenable, Tosfos said is exactly what you mean.
That's right.
Right, so right.
That's what I was.
That smells like Beasley. This is being correct.
So I want to raise the following Chakir. We've established that there are two din. There's a din of Gemar din, and then there's a din of the Maisa Ver. Will be Gomer as Dino as the Yisrael if the Gerus with all the requirements and necessary conditions have to be met to constitute a Gemar din. But once we're Gomer as Dino, we're going to condemn him for the crime, and whatever is included in the Maisa Vera, that's what he'll get. Now, Yesh Lachma. What is Hasra? Is Hasra a condition in the Gemar din, or is it a condition in the Maisa Vera? Is anybody following me?
We were
Okay,
assuming it's in the Gemara din, as we've been assuming all along.
Yeah, I'll tell you why we've been assuming all along. And we were 100% right to make that assumption. Because the Torah says to Besdin, Vitzilu ha'eda. And what does Vitzilu ha'eda mean? Turn over every leaf to see if possibly you could find a kula. Maybe he's not guilty as accused. Maybe he did it b'shogeg. Was there Asra? So how can you be Gomer as Dino and condemn him for death without being absolutely certain that you've exhausted every possibility on the Vitzilu ha'eda, and there was Asra that proves and establishes beyond with certainty that he was what? He was amazing and not a shogeg. Is Memela, we cannot condemn this person to death without Asra. And therefore we would totally justify. And Tosfos is creating problems. The only thing is, we got to live with Tosfos. It's not. This is not about Berzon. It's about Tosfos. I'd like to suggest the following: with regard to Ben Noach, there's no halach of vitzilu eid. There's no such thing as vitzilu eid with regard to Ben. Hasra is a different kind of halacha entirely, and it doesn't apply to Ben Noach. A Ben Noach who killed b'shogeg would not be chayav. And you might ask me if so, then Hasra, in order to be Gomer Estino, should be a necessary requirement as far as Ben Noach is concerned, because how do you know that he killed b'mezid? Maybe he killed b'shogeg. But there's a different halacha of Hasra. Hasra tells me the following. When a person is about to commit a crime deliberately, we got to slow him down. What do I mean by slow him down? In France, there's something called a crime of passion. You familiar with that?
Yeah.
Anyway, but I'm not. Let's forget about that. I didn't say
consequence.
No, I'll tell you what I mean. You feel not just the consequence; it's more than that. What it means is, let me see if I can formulate this the way I want to formulate it. Is that I'm going to give a mashal. You scare a person. Wow, you know what I mean? He's caught up in a passion, in a moment of passion. He's like, what's the name of this? He had a half a bottle of Glenlivet. How do you pronounce it? Glenlivet? Okay, whatever it is. I don't know if you pronounce the T or you don't pronounce it.
It's a schnapps.
You do.
Schnapps, it's called schnapps. The man drank a half a bottle of schnapps. He's going wild. He's going crazy. He's a terrorist. He starts killing people, right? Slow him down a little. That's what Hasra is all about. Hasra means, hey, fellows, you want to think about what you're doing? You know what? Maybe you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. Calm down. We're not talking about knowing whether it's a Mazid or Shogeg. For example, I'll tell you the truth. It could be that a Chaver, according to one man, the other needs Asra. Even though the Chaver knows the difference between Mazid and Shogeg, we don't have to tell him, anything about the law. He knows the law better than you do. But we want to tell this Chaver, even if he's a Chaver, to be Masra him so that we calm him down a little bit. Maybe you want to think twice about you doing. Don't get carried away. And in that sense, in that very slim nuance of a difference between just going wild and implementing your terrible, dastardly criminal act, the terrible destructive act, and thinking about it a second time, there is almost a gap here, so to speak, between Mazid and Shogeg. It says Tosfos. That halach of Asra does not apply to a Ben Noach. Because in terms of a Maisa Vera, you want to know whether this Maisa Vera was a full-fledged Maisa Vera, a Mazid Gomer, or maybe there's a nuance that you fall short of that Maisa Vera with regard to a Ben Noach. His Maisa Vera is always, always, always considered Mazid Gomer. There is no chazaka with regard to a Ben Noach. A Ben Noach who's about to pull the trigger doesn't have any chazaka. We don't have any reason to say, well, you know what? Maybe give him Asra. Maybe he'll climb down from his high horse and he'll have a second thought about it. With regard to Yisrael, we need Asra. Why do we need Asra? Because we need Asra to establish a Maisa Avera. Maybe his Avera falls a little bit short of a full-fledged Mazid Avera. But with regard to a Ben Noach, the Maisa Avera is complete even without Asra. Is when Mela, when we now condemn a Ben Noach for Baaleshes Ish or for Ritzicha, as he's a ger today, we are bound by the laws of Gemar Din, and all those requirements and conditions must be met. We cannot put him to death as Israel, as a ger, with a bezdin of one judge and an aid of one aid. But as far as Asra is concerned, Tosfos says we're going to put this guy to death without Asra. How could that be? Because Asra is not a condition in the Gemar Din. It's not generated by the fact that bezdin have their hands are tied unless they have that Asra. No, it's a question of judging and evaluating in a certain hierarchy the Maisa Avera. What level of Mazid is there in this Maisa Avera? And if that be the case, we understand very well that when we go back to the Maisa Avera, the Maisa Avera of a guy does not need a Asra. And to the same extent that we can put him to death with Saif, we can put him to death without Asra. But Tosfos would not undermine our whole thesis. And even if we were to disagree with Tosfos, we have a right to do so. But I'm insisting that Tosfos would not throw out the baby with the, what is it called? The bathwater, because Tosfos would certainly agree to us that our premise is correct. We need all the conditions necessary for the Gemar Din, just that Tosfos thinks that Asra does not fit into that category, and Asra is halach in the Maisa Avera, not in the Gemara.
I've got a question.
How are we doing on the clock, Rabosa?
I've got a question.
Do we still have 5 minutes? Can you ask the question
Three
in
or
4
4 or
minutes? Or you have to run? You don't have to run. Okay. So I wanted to add one point because we have to move on to another sugya. We can't constantly come back to this sugya. Here's the question that bothers my mind. And with this, we'll conclude. We'll make a siyum. Maybe we'll have a schnapps. We'll celebrate two things. According to Rabbi Chanina, the gerus, I'm going to ask it as a question first. There's an obvious answer, but I want you to give me the answer. Did the gerus take place before the Gemara Din or after the Gemara Din? Before the Gemara Din.
Oh, that's it.
What would be in the following scenario? This is what boggles my mind. Supposing there was a Gemara Din before the gerus, could we now condemn him, execute
He was
him
already condemned.
as a Ben Yisrael after gerus with Eid Echad, with Dayan Echad, and without a Hasra?
It was often like that.
It was after the Gemara Din, but now he's in Yisrael. Do you follow?
But can you put him
We
together?
need a Gemara Din.
Yeah.
Well, there are conditions in a Gemara Din on a Yisrael. You can't be Gomer Dino Shel Yisrael in a bezdin of one judge, or with one aid, or without Asra, if we don't accept Tosis, right? But now I'm asking you a different question. There already was a Gemara Din in the first bezdin.
If you compare it to the Ben Sarah, then yeah.
I'm sorry, there already. I didn't say it right.
It's Gavra
There already was a Gemara Din as a Ben Noach.
Yeah. There's a Gavra Ketal. A Bar Ketal.
So we don't need.
You could say that. That's
We don't
only
need
a
a
sign.
best. Can you imagine on both sides? This will be a quiz question. I'm going to wake you up in the middle of the night. Do this with one of your scholarly friends. No, really. And ask him the following.
There won't be a-
Can we put to death a Jew with one aid, one Dayan, and without Asra? He'll kick you in the whatever. He'll tell you you're crazy. We're going to put to death a Jew without a bezdin of Chav Gimel? But here I think we came up with a solution.
He's a Gavra Ketal.
There was a Gemara Din as a Ben Noach. We don't need to be Gomer as Dino. So all those conditions that were necessary for Gemara Din no longer apply because we already have the Gemara Din. The guy is going to be shocked. All right, Rabosai, thank you so much. And we really schwitz tonight, but I think we're getting there, you know. All right. Relative-
My question.
Yeah, now we're ready for your question. Sorry.
Say that the Hafra is connected to the Masechet. Why does the Hafra have to be exact for some people? It's only to slow it down.
But which kind of people? You talking about a chaver or what? Or you?
Why does the Hafra have to be?
No, you're gonna be killed if you know that it's found out.
We have to see and judge how much of a Mason is he. Is he such a Mason that even after Asra, he's going to go ahead and do the Ma'asav Be'er? That reflects on the level of the Ma'asav Be'er. We're jacking up the Ma'asav Be'er to the highest level.
If I say that he's
It has nothing to do with Gemara.
if I say he's hired, I don't know,
Yeah, Kelly and skip.
Kenny and a skillet, then we
It's
don't.
not
put it
God
there.
willing to die. Yeah.
Is that my first anywhere? That if he was sentenced already if he was sentenced, then he converted. If he was sentenced to Misa and then he converted, are there Makaros that say that he would be put to death?
What's the Mishnah seems like?
You want to know the truth, David? I just let you guys go because we're running out of time. In my opinion, it's totally wrong what we said.
We had to hold it from back in.
It would be absolutely impossible to implement a Misa on a Yisrael without all the requirements.
Right.
It's impossible. But again, you know,
Yeah.
you said what you said, and I say what I say. You know?
Funny because in secular law, there's a big division between procedural law and substantive law. So
You're a
procedural
lawyer?
law, well, I'm not a lawyer, but
Go ahead. Substantial.
So substantive law, sorry,
And
substantive
what?
law
And
and procedural law.
Right.
So in other words, if someone from overseas is guilty of something, you would, the country wouldn't, if it was a primitive country, they wouldn't use the procedure of that country, but they might use, you have conflicts of laws,
Wait, let's call it country A and country B. We
Yeah.
now have this guy in country B.
Yeah, yeah.
Which
Let's say
procedure-
divorce, then let's say divorce.
Which procedures will we use?
Procedures
country
will
A,
use,
where
will use the procedures of the country that he's now in.
B, we call
But
it
we'll
B.
use the substantive law of where he came from.
Oh.
And in some
Let me
times,
just see,
there's
is
a
that-
whole, there's a whole
Is
series
that,
of conflicts of
that,
law.
that sounds similar to what we're
Yeah,
saying.
that's what I'm saying, it's very similar.
Very similar, might be parallel.
In conflicts of laws, that's the thing,
Yeah.
if you say, let's say in the world, that the laws of of Italy will apply, in other words, let's say in Italy, they give daughters only, or whatever. So I'm saying, I think the will have to be verified properly, like any other will in that country, but the ramifications, the results will be according to the other country. In other words, just to.
Are these rules set by international law?
There's a thing called conflict of law, private international law. It's not
Ah.
public international.
Good,
law.
good night.
Let's go, let's go. Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sam.
So is next week the last week, or are you taking a listen break?
I don't know, let me think about it. Yeah, write me, I just 1 second, I just want to see my notes here for a second.